Welcome to the Appalachian Historical Review. This is the audio home for AppalachianGenealogy.com. Each week, we dig into the records, migration paths, and the real stories of the people who settled the Appalachian Range. We're here to look at the actual documents and the everyday lives that define our heritage. Now, let's step into the records and look at what the documents themselves reveal.
Picture this. It's a foggy morning in May of 1892. You're up near the Virginia-Kentucky border.
Right, moving through a really rugged, just completely isolated stretch of the Appalachian Mountains.
Exactly. And you're in a horse-drawn wagon, slowly making your way through this narrow pass known as Pound Gap. But inside that wagon, it isn't just cargo. It's a literal fortune in illicit moonshine cash.
Which is incredibly dangerous to be moving around back then.
Oh, absolutely. So the morning is dead quiet. And then, out of nowhere, the silence shatters. Gunfire erupts at point-blank range from behind this massive sandstone outcrop.
Just a complete ambush.
Total ambush. Within minutes, the horses are dead, the wagon is just riddled with bullets, and 5 people are killed.
You know, it sounds like the climax of a classic Western. And usually when you hear a story about a 19th century Appalachian shootout, you immediately file it away under a very familiar category, right?
Yeah, the classic lawless hillbilly feud.
Exactly. You think Hatfields and McCoys, you think chaotic mountain vendettas, families shooting each other over a stolen pig, that kind of thing.
Right. But if you look closer at the bodies in the dirt at Pound Gap, and, you look at the people pulling the triggers, you start to realize this wasn't some random backwoods brawl.
Not at all.
So today, for this deep dive, we've got a stack of incredible sources tailored just for you. We're looking at old court cases, newspaper clippings, Virginia militia records. We are unpacking this lesser-known conflict called the 1892 feud at Tom's Creek.
Or the Wise County feud, as it's sometimes called.
Right. And as we dig into these records, a totally different picture emerges. I mean, this wasn't a family squabble. This was, well, it was a hostile corporate takeover.
It really was. And that's the journey we're taking you on today. We're going to explore how this shootout between two heavily armed factions, the Mullins clan and the Taylor-Fleming alliance, how it was actually a war over a local underground economy.
And a really lucrative one, too.
Oh, hugely lucrative.
Yeah.
And we'll see how the fallout from this specific bloody feud became the exact catalyst that cleared the ground for modern, state-sponsored corporate capitalism to basically take over the mountains.
It's wild. But, okay. To understand how we get from a wagon full of cash to a Wall Street corporate takeover, we have to understand the world these people were operating in.
We have to set the scene, yeah.
Right. Like, think about your life today. If you need a loan, you go to a bank. If someone steals your car, you call the police. You have a property dispute, you go to court. Now imagine all of that just vanishes.
Because we're talking about the post-Civil War landscape around Tom's Creek, right?
Exactly. Formal, official government basically didn't exist out there.
It was a total vacuum. I mean, the rugged topography of the mountains meant that isolation was just a fact of life. You couldn't easily march an army or a police force into these hollows.
2 dense snow roads.
Right. So for generations, local authority wasn't held by a judge or a sheriff. It was held by kinship networks.
Like your extended family.
Yeah, your family was your safety net. They were your bank. And if things went wrong, they were your defense force.
And what I found so fascinating in the sources is what the bedrock of this local economy actually was. It wasn't the U.S. dollar.
No, not at all.
It was corn whiskey, which, I mean, makes total sense when you think about the logistics of it.
Well, yeah, if you're a farmer in a remote mountain valley, it's incredibly difficult and expensive to transport a bulky wagon full of raw corn over these terrible mountain roads to a market.
Yeah, the corn would probably rot or the wagon would break.
Exactly. But if you distill that corn into whiskey, suddenly you have a high-value, compact product that doesn't spoil.
It essentially becomes your primary liquid asset. Literally liquid.
Literally liquid, yes, it was their currency. But everything changes when the federal government steps in.
Ah, the taxes.
Yep. They passed the 1862 excise tax to help pay for the Civil War, and suddenly this traditional agricultural currency, the absolute lifeblood of their economy, is criminalized.
Because they're not paying federal tax on it.
Right. So federal revenue agents start coming into the mountains to collect, and these local farmers are instantly reclassified as outlaws.
So these local people, they basically have a choice. Give up your entire livelihood or figure out how to protect it.
And that's where the kinship networks really evolve.
Right, because reading through the history, these families start functioning a lot like an early informal cartel. And I don't mean that in a Hollywood gangster way.
Sure, not like the mafia in Suits.
Yeah, I mean, they had to build an organized system to enforce contracts and protect their property simply because they couldn't call the cops. Like if someone didn't pay a moonshine debt, a handshake meant nothing.
But a handshake backed by 30 cousins with Winchester rifles.
Exactly. That is a binding contract.
That is the perfect framework for understanding this. They built surrogate, legal, and economic institutions, and the absolute most powerful of these surrogate institutions in the Wise County borderlands was the Mullins clan.
Run by a guy who you really wouldn't want to mess with.
No, run by a patriarch named Ira Mullins, often referred to in the sources as Bad Ira.
Yeah, you don't get the nickname Bad Ira for being a pushover. This guy was basically the CEO of a massive underground syndicate.
He was a brilliant organizer, honestly. Ira ran a highly lucrative moonshine and mercantile network right across the state border.
Moving just wild amounts of money.
Huge amounts. And he used his massive web of family ties to handle the logistics. His kinsmen were the teamsters driving the wagons, the armed guards protecting the shipments.
The couriers handling the cash.
Exactly. They were moving all this untaxed wealth right under the noses of federal investigators.
But, every dominant syndicate eventually faces a rival. And the rival in this story is this guy named Dr. Marshall Benton Taylor. Goes by the nickname the Red Fox of the Mountains.
The Red Fox, yeah.
Now, hang on. The sources paint this incredibly contradictory picture of this guy. He's described as an herb physician, a spiritualist, a local preacher, and a former U.S. Marshal and Revenue agent.
A very busy guy.
Right. But then we see him building a ruthless mountain faction and aligning with two notorious local outlaws, Calvin and Heenan Fleming. How does a man of God with a federal badge end up running a mountain gang? Those two resumes don't match.
It seems like a huge contradiction until you realize what Taylor was actually doing. He was weaponizing his state law enforcement credentials.
Oh, wow. Thick.
Yeah, in a region where the concept of the law was fluid at best, carrying a badge allowed Taylor to harass and target his economic rivals under the guise of official duty.
So he's not enforcing the law?
No, he was eliminating his competition.
Ah, so the badge is just a cover for a shakedown.
Precisely. But, a badge alone isn't going to dismantle a machine as big as the Mullins clan. If you want to take down Bad Ira, you need serious firepower.
You need muscle.
You need muscle. And that is exactly why he aligns with the Fleming brothers. The Flemings brought their own extensive kinship ties and a very, very real reputation for violence.
So together, this Taylor-Fleming alliance was finally strong enough to challenge the Mullins network head-on.
Right. And that Cold War turns hot in July of 1889. Doc Taylor leads a posse, ostensibly as a lawman, and they ambush a Mullins wagon right on the main street of Wise Courthouse.
Just in the middle of town.
In the middle of town. It's a massive shootout. Hundreds of shots are fired. Ira Mullins survives, but a bullet shatters his hips. He is permanently paralyzed from the waist down.
Which is, that's a devastating blow, not just physically, but economically for the cartel.
Absolutely. A paralyzed man cannot physically ride out to enforce his contracts or protect his supply lines.
So because Ira can't physically protect his turf anymore, he has to rely on his capital. He takes his money and he places a $300 bounty on Doc Taylor's head.
And in 1889, Appalachia, $300 is a staggering amount of money.
Life-changing money.
It turns an economic rivalry into an absolute arms race. Both factions start openly arming their relatives, their tenant farmers, even their neighbors.
Just everyone is bracing for impact.
Yeah, everyone in the region knows that a final decisive confrontation is inevitable.
Which brings us right back to that foggy morning at Pound Gap, May 14th, 1892.
The ambush.
Right. So with this massive bounty out and his physical mobility gone, Ira makes a desperate calculation. He decides he has to liquidate and move his operations across the border to Kentucky.
It's a massive risk.
It is. It's the paralyzed Ira, his wife Lorenza, a kinsman named Wilson, and a few hired hands. And according to local rumors and the sources, they're carrying the entire operation's savings.
An estimated $1,000, right?
Yes, hidden beneath Lorenza's skirts. Moving that amount of cash through a mountain pass was incredibly risky. But the timing was incredibly deliberate.
Because they chose to move on a Saturday.
Exactly. Saturday was court day at Wise Courthouse. And court day wasn't just about trials. It was like the biggest social and economic event of the month.
It drew everyone out from all the remote hollows and concentrated them in town.
Right. So it was the absolute perfect cover to move a fortune unnoticed because everyone else was distracted.
It was a very sound, tactical decision by Ira. But the problem is, Doc Taylor and the Flemings didn't care about court day. They weren't in town.
They were waiting for him.
They had fortified a position behind that sandstone outcrop, which would forever be known after this as Killing Rock.
Such a dark name.
Yeah. And as the wagon crested the gap, the Taylor-Fleming alliance opened fire with .45 caliber Winchester rifles. It was an absolute slaughter.
They shot the horses first, right?
Yes. First they shot the team of horses to trap the wagon. Then they shot Ira Mullins over 20 times.
Over 20 times. It's an unbelievable level of overkill. 5 people died that morning. The only survivors were Wilson's wife, Jane Mullins, and Ira's 14-year-old son.
Who just barely managed to sprint into the woods and escape.
Yeah, 14-year-old kid. But the violence didn't end with the ambush. And this is where the story, for me, takes a turn that is truly chilling.
The dynamiting.
Yeah. The killing wasn't enough for the Taylor faction. In August of 1892, so months after the massacre, unknown individuals hiked up to the local cemetery and used dynamite to blow up Ira Mullins' grave.
It's just wild.
I had to read that part of the source material 3 times. I mean, why would someone risk hiking back into enemy territory months after a murder, carrying high explosives, just to blow up a patch of dirt?
It seems crazy.
The man is already dead. What is the logic there?
Well, it goes much deeper than just disrespecting a rival. This was a form of symbolic warfare. Think about what a grave represents in a highly localized, kinship-based society.
Like a deed to the land, almost.
Exactly. It is your permanent claim to the land. It says, my ancestors are buried here. This valley belongs to us. So, by dynamiting the grave, scattering the remains, and destroying the coffin, the Taylor faction was sending a terrifying message.
They were erasing them.
They were attempting to literally erase the Mullins family's geographic and ancestral hold on the region. They were saying, you don't just lose your leader, you lose your right to exist in this landscape.
Total erasure. But, I mean, you can't exactly dynamite a grave in a mountain valley without making some noise.
Definitely not.
And that level of extreme theatrical violence ends up being the biggest mistake the Taylor faction ever made, because an explosion that big finally forces the state of Virginia to pay attention.
And this is the pivot point. This is where the story shifts completely. Up until now, the state government in Richmond had largely tolerated, or at least ignored, this localized backwoods violence.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Right, it wasn't their problem. But the scale of the Killing Rock massacre and the subsequent dynamiting, it terrified the state. And they weren't terrified for moral reasons.
You were terrified for financial reasons. Follow the money. Always.
Always. Northern and foreign capitalists were just starting to realize that Wise County was sitting on massive, untapped reserves of coal and timber.
The industrial boom is looming.
Yeah, they were drawing up plans for major industrial development and a wild, uncontrollable shootout over untaxed whiskey. That is incredibly bad for business. It scares off investors.
Right. You aren't going to build a multi-million-dollar railroad if your survey crews might get caught in a crossfire between mountain cartels.
Exactly. So the local clerk of court, a man named James S. Beverly, realizes local law enforcement is completely outgunned.
What does he do?
He bypasses the county sheriff entirely and sends a frantic telegram directly to the governor of Virginia.
Wow. Going straight to the top.
Yep. And as a result, state militia companies are placed on 24-hour standby.
But, and this is key, notice what the state doesn't do. They have the militia on standby, but they don't march the army into Wise County.
No, they hold back.
Why not? If they have the military ready, why not just roll in and crush these factions?
Because occupying an American county with the military sends the exact wrong message to those wealthy Wall Street investors.
It screens instability.
It screams that the region is fundamentally unstable. So the state opts for a quieter, more surgical approach. Instead of the militia, they utilize corporate railroad detectives to hunt down the killers.
Think about the shift there. We've gone from local families policing themselves to the state importing private corporate detectives to act as the law.
It's the privatization of justice, really.
Yeah. And these detectives kick off this incredible 10-week manhunt for Doc Taylor. And Taylor, the Red Fox, uses every trick he knows to evade them. The sources say he hid out in these dense formations called laurel hells.
Oh yeah, laurel hills. If you've never been in the deep Appalachians, a laurel hell is a thicket of mountain laurel and rhododendron so incredibly dense and tangled that you literally cannot walk through it.
You just get stuck.
Yeah, it blocks out the sun, you have to crawl on your belly, and it is almost impossible for a tracker on horseback to follow you in there.
And didn't he also wear what locals called fox shoes?
He did.
He took a pair of boots and attached the heels backwards. So if the railroad detectives or tracking dogs found his footprints in the mud, it looked like he was walking in the opposite direction.
It's brilliant evasion tactics.
It really is. But, it was clever, but the corporate dragnet was just too well-funded and too vast. In August 1892, railroad detectives finally cornered Doc Taylor. They found him hiding inside an empty freight car across the border in Bluefield, West Virginia.
And they transport him back to Wise Courthouse under heavy guard.
Right. And the trial itself is fascinating because of how they actually caught him. I mean, remember, we are in 1892. There is no modern forensics, no DNA, no CSI. So how do you prove whose gun fired a bullet in the middle of the woods?
They used some incredibly sharp early ballistics work.
Yeah, tell us about the rimfire thing.
So, during the investigation at Killing Rock, detectives recovered shell casings that were designed for rimfire cartridges. Now, to simplify this, a rimfire cartridge is fired when the gun's firing pin strikes the outer edge, or the rim, of the bullet's base.
Okay, I'm following.
But Doc Taylor's known weapon was a centerfire Winchester rifle, which strikes the dead center of the bullet. So on paper, his gun doesn't match the murder weapon.
It's the perfect alibi. But the jury isn't convinced.
No, they're not.
They get their hands on Taylor's rifle, they inspect the mechanics really closely, and they discover that Doc Taylor had secretly taken a file and modified his rifle's plunger.
It's just wild.
He angled it just enough so that a centerfire mechanism would strike the edge of a rimfire cartridge. He literally engineered his gun to try and throw off the investigation.
But instead of saving him, finding that specific, deliberate modification is what sealed his fate.
The jury saw right through it.
They did. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to hang. And true to his reputation as the eccentric Red Fox, his exit was bizarre.
Bizarre is putting it lightly. He is standing on the gallows on October 27, 1893, and he decides to preach his own funeral sermon.
Right to the crowd.
Right there. He looks out at the crowd and makes this surreal prediction. He claims that, just like Jesus, he will rise from the dead in 3 days.
Which, he was hanged, and he most definitely did not return 3 days later.
No, he did not. So Doc Taylor's gone. But what about the muscle? The state still has to deal with the Fleming brothers.
And the state pursued them just as relentlessly. In January 1894, a deputy cornered Calvin and Heenan Fleming inside a tiny post office in West Virginia.
Post office.
Yeah. A massive, close-quarters gun battle broke out. Calvin was killed in the doorway, and Heenan was captured with a severe head wound. But Heenan's story takes a really weird twist. He is brought to trial in 1895, but he is acquitted.
Wait. They have him dead to rights? He was part of the ambush? How does he get acquitted?
Because the state's star witness, Jane Mullins, one of the 2 survivors of the Killing Rock ambush, contracted mountain fever and died before she could testify.
Wow. Talk about timing.
Yeah. Mountain fever was a tick-borne illness similar to Rocky Mountain spotted fever that was common in the deep brush of Appalachia. Without her direct eyewitness testimony, the prosecution just collapsed.
That is wild.
It's a stark reminder of the reality of the era, you know? Sometimes the harsh natural environment dictated justice before a judge ever could.
Okay, so let's step back and look at the board by 1895. The powerful Mullins network is shattered. Doc Taylor is dead. Calvin Fleming is dead. Heenan is sidelined. The heavy hitters, the kings of this local underground economy, have been entirely wiped off the map.
And this brings us to the true climax of the story. The suppression of these factions wasn't just about bringing murderers to justice.
It was bigger than that.
Much bigger. The state's intervention was, functionally, an economic clearing operation. By crushing these powerful armed kinship clans, the state cleared the physical and legal terrain for corporate capitalism.
The ultimate aha moment.
Exactly, because look who steps in immediately after the dust settles. In 1898, a businessman named George L. Carter starts buying up vast tracts of mineral rights across the region.
Right on the heels of the feud.
Yep. By 1902, he consolidates this land to form the Virginia Iron, Coal, and Coke Company, the VICC. They completely pave over the old world. They turn Tom's Creek, the site of all this family warfare, into a massive, highly structured corporate coal mining camp.
So the state comes in, uses corporate detectives to crush the local cartels,
Yeah.
and then just hands the keys to Wall Street. But here's my question. Does the arrival of the state and these massive corporations actually civilize the area? I mean, did the violence stop, or did it just change the flavor of it?
The violence didn't stop at all. It just became institutionalized.
Institutionalize how?
Well, the unpredictable private vengeance of the moonshiners was systematically replaced by the disciplined, state-backed policing of corporate coal guards. And crucially, it became deeply, violently racialized.
Yeah, the sources outline a horrifying event in 1902, right as the VICC is taking over. It involves a young black miner named Wiley Genn. Now, keeping in mind we are just reporting what's in the historical record here, it's a grim look at this new power dynamic.
It really is. Wiley Genn was a boarding house proprietor and a miner working at Tom's Creek. He was accused of assaulting a white girl, but before the legal system could even pretend to process the charge, a mob formed.
And it wasn't just a handful of family members like the old feuds.
No, it was a mob of nearly 500 white miners and local citizens. They descended on the jail, dragged him out, and murdered him in a hail of gunfire.
500 people. And no one stops them.
No one stops them. And it demonstrates an incredibly grim reality about power. The exact same state and judicial apparatus that mobilized railroads, governors, and detectives to crush the mountain clans a decade earlier was now entirely willing to turn a blind eye to a lynch mob.
Because it didn't threaten capital.
Right. They leveraged that state power to maintain brutal racial hierarchies and protect corporate property while completely abandoning any pretense of actual justice.
It fundamentally changes how you look at these historical conflicts. We started with a shootout over moonshine at a sandstone rock, but what we're really looking at is the machinery of a modern economy being built.
Built on a foundation of erasure.
Exactly. The state used the outrage over the Killing Rock massacre to wipe out the traditional family-based networks that controlled the land. And by doing that, they ushered in the era of corporate coal. The locals lost their autonomy, the corporations moved in, and the violence just got a new uniform.
That is the real tragedy of the transition. And I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder about how total this corporate takeover really was.
Oh, about the town names.
Yes. The state used the courts and detectives to erase the power of these mountain clans, but the corporations went a step further. They erased the memory of them entirely.
How do you mean?
Think about the geography. Right in the middle of all this transition was a growing community called East Stone Gap. But when the railroad developers arrived, they decided the name East Stone Gap was too easily confused with the nearby town of Big Stone Gap for their train schedules.
So they just changed it.
The railroad companies simply decided to rename the town. They call it Elverton.
Elverton. Who is Elverton?
Elverton R. Chapman. He was a Wall Street financier, a robber baron who famously defended the monopolistic sugar trust in Washington, D.C., a man who likely never cared a single day about the people of Tom's Creek, never walked through a Laurel Hell, and never met a moonshiner.
That is a staggering detail.
Yeah.
You have the descendants of these fiercely independent mountain clans people who literally fought and died to control their own valleys, ending up living and working in company towns named after distant Wall Street millionaires.
The local power died at Killing Rock, and the corporate power named the very ground they were buried in.
The very same millionaires who funded the detectives that hunted their ancestors down. Next time you hear a story about a lawless feud, keep that image in your mind. Look past the gunfire and ask yourself who is waiting to buy the land when the smoke clears. We hope this deep dive gave you a new lens to view the history behind the headlines. Keep questioning the stories you're told, keep looking for the why, and thank you for joining us. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to this installment of the Appalachian Historical Review. Remember to visit the digital archive at appalachiangenealogy.com. Join us next time for further study into the records and history of the Appalachian region.